When was the last time you saw a loading screen on your phone or computer or video game and thought, "Ah, wonderful, I finally have some time to myself"? Or when was the last time you went to Starbucks to buy one of their drinks and thought, "My goodness, how affordable"? Now, these seemingly small, trivial observations are, I believe, steps towards identifying values of our technological world. Now, in order to assess the values of any culture or movement requires some broad generalizations on my part, as well as some forgiveness on your part. And so my request would be, don't get lost in the specifics of anything I have to say this afternoon, but rather consider some of the broad principles that I speak about. And so with that being said, as we consider our technological world, I want to invite you to consider our technological condition. Now, what do I mean by that? What do I mean when I say our technological condition? Well, think about it this way. If I were to say that I have a skin condition, and so say after this talk you came and offered me a handshake, but my skin condition would prohibit that, you would assume that perhaps I'm sick, perhaps I'm contagious, perhaps I don't want to spread that to you. But it's very much equally possible that my skin, the condition of my skin is clean, and I don't want your filth to get on my hand. And so there's a different way to think about it. Or consider you call your employer and say, there are some road conditions. Now, your employer is going to assume that there's either a traffic jam or a wreck, when in fact, it could be the case that the conditions are so nice that you decided to pull over on the side of the road and enjoy a beautiful day instead of withering away in an office again. And so when we think about conditions, we typically think about them as bad. Skin conditions are bad. Road conditions are bad. And so when I speak of technological conditions, the assumption is they're bad. However, just to clarify, my point here is not to say all technology is evil. My point here is not to say all technological issues are wrong. But what I have found is that when we try to take technological values and jam them into our relationships, bad things happen. I've spent the last 8 or so years serving in the Cincinnati Chinese church. And not to make any stereotypes, but the Chinese Asian American culture, at least in comparison to me, is very tech savvy. I am not. This clicker is about as tech savvy as I get, and that could be a problem this afternoon. And so, not being a tech savvy person, I've been able to observe technological values and how they impact relationships and families, because even though the culture I serve is very technological, when I step into homes, when I step into families, there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of brokenness. There's a lot of disconnect. There's a lot of lack of good communication. And so as we consider some of these values of the technological world, let's consider them this way. I'll start by saying there are 5 technological values that I've observed. And they are that which is efficient, immediate, comfortable, safe, and cheap. Efficient, immediate, comfortable, safe, and cheap. And so, if you're wondering where or how can we see these values on display, I would invite you to look no further than where you are right now. Consider the dynamics and everything that goes on with a TED Talk. A TED Talk is efficient, immediate, comfortable, safe, and cheap. Just to think about it this way, when it comes to efficiency and immediacy, I was told in preparation, I have 5 to 18 minutes to inspire you with some nugget of truth, with some kind of word of encouragement, even though we all know when it comes to education and other forms of learning, it may take years. And yet, 5 to 18 minutes to instill this wonderful truth. It's good. That happens, and I've heard a lot of excellent words of inspiration today, but most forms of learning take much longer. Or when we think about this issue of being comfortable and safe. Now, when we consider that, in preparation for this talk, I was told I can speak on any number of topics I want to speak on, as long as I don't speak on anything religious or political. Now, to be fair, that's a tough challenge to ask of a pastor, but I wanted to respect that. But why is it? Why is it the case that of all the different kind of TED Talks we may have, of all the different topics we may enjoy and talk about, why don't we speak of things that really do have meaning, such as religion and spirit and politics? We want to avoid those things. I would suggest because when we talk about religion and politics, it leads to disagreement. It may lead to somebody being offended, and it may lead to conflict. And when all of these come, people start to feel uncomfortable. People start to feel unsafe. And so we avoid it. Now, as far as this issue of being cheap, as far as a TED Talk is concerned, I don't know about you guys, but I didn't have to pay to get in the door. Granted, I'm speaking, but I'm of the impression that no one really had to pay to get in the door. And even if you did, you can download any TED Talk you want later for free online. And so we see each of these different values on display here just today. And so usually when we think about technology and our technological world, we think about screens, we think about phones, video games. But what I want to suggest is that this entire thing is a consequence of our technological world. You can look all over and see them. Highways, buffets, healthcare, they all exhibit these 5 values. And so just to be very, very clear, I am not saying these values are always bad. I am not a doomsday prepper who thinks that technology is going to be the death of all of us. I'm simply not that kind of person. However, or rather, just last year I bought a home, and I wanted each of these values to be on display. I wanted a realtor and a home that was efficient, immediate, comfortable, safe, and cheap. All of those values were great for me then. But the problem that I've observed time and time again is that we take those values from our technological world and then try to force them into our relationships. If you've ever seen one of those children's toys where it has different shapes, like a triangle or a circle, it's a pretty simple game. Triangle goes in the 3-sided thing, right? However, what we end up trying to do is we take a value from our technological world and then try to force it into our relationships, and then we ask, why isn't this working? What is going on here? And so, by contrast, we've already assessed some of these technological values. So what of the relational values that we have? So I would suggest important relational values are endurance, commitment, pain, risk, and sacrifice. Endurance, commitment, pain, risk, and sacrifice. And when we try to compare these with our technological values, we see it just doesn't work. If you were to say that in technology, we want things that are efficient and immediate. We don't want things that require commitment and endurance. We want the next big thing. We want the next new phone. We want the next awesome gadget. We don't want something that requires commitment and endurance. That sounds terrible. When it comes to technology, we want that which is safe and comfortable. We don't want pain and risk. In fact, technologically, through science and medicine, we are trying to eliminate pain and risk. And so again, it just doesn't seem to work together. And when it comes to being cheap, we don't want that because when it comes to relationships, we require sacrifice. We require putting needs before others. And so considering these values, consider first a parent-child relationship. I have 3 boys. And let me tell you, there is nothing efficient or immediate about parenting. Rather, if I went to my kids and said, all right, guys, get some socks on, get some shoes on, and in 10 minutes be ready to be out the door. 10 minutes later, they might have a really awesome Lego fort. But they are not going to have their socks on. They are not going to have their shoes on. They are not going to be ready to go anywhere. And what they need from me is not more efficiency. What they need from me is not more immediacy. They don't need me to always expect immediate results from them. What they need from me is endurance. What they need from me is commitment. What they need from me is a willingness to stand by them, to encourage them, to push them, to remind them to do what needs to be done. However, what often happens is we do expect our kids or our parents or our friends to have immediate results. For example, we might tell our child, I want you to learn violin. And a year later, it's just not going very well. What's the problem? Why aren't the results more immediate? And so we go into our relationships with these technological values when it's just not working. Now, Consider a different scenario. Consider a scenario in which you have a marriage in which the stress is very, very high and the funds are very, very low. Many of you may feel like you're there right now. And so this is a situation where you don't need more efficiency and immediate results. What you need is commitment. What you need is a reminder from the other that they are going to stand by you and be with you no matter how difficult things become. And so we start to see that the values of relationships are very different from the values of our technological world, even though we often try to force them into the other. Now, when it comes to this next value, it's probably the one you heard and you said, I just don't know about that one. After all, how many of us want more pain in our relationships? Probably none of us. And yet, what I've found is that pain must be an essential value in healthy, meaningful, intimate relationships. Otherwise, those relationships are going to fall apart. I've had to stand by parents as they watch their child wither away from things far beyond their control. And in that moment, what that child needs is not a parent who says, oh, everything must be safe. Oh, everything must be comfortable. No, that wouldn't work. What they need is a parent who says, any amount of pain that I endure is worth more, or is worth it for the sake of this relationship. I'm willing to endure anything that comes my way because this relationship is worth it. And so when we say that we're willing to endure pain, what it says is the relationship is more valuable than any amount of pain that could be experienced. Now, as far as risk is concerned, in any time we participate in any kind of meaningful, intimate relationship, risk is being taken. When we have children, when we date, when we have a friend, we are taking risks. We are risking being betrayed. We are risking being disobeyed. We take so many risks in every single real, meaningful relationship. And yet, we could think about it as though if you don't take risks in relationships, you'll avoid pain. You'll avoid betrayal. You'll avoid being hurt. That may be true, but you'll also avoid real love. You'll also avoid real meaning and connection with other people. And so, in thinking about those different values, and thinking about our last value of sacrifice, I think about sacrifice as taking those other four values of endurance, commitment, pain, and risk, and wrapping them all together into one, which becomes the foundation for what I would say is meaningful, healthy relationships. Sacrifice. Sacrifice being putting the needs of others before your own. After all, a wise man once said, there is no greater love than to lay down your life for your friends. I believe that to be true. And if that is true, then we find that in relationships, there is going to be sacrifice. There are going to be times where we say, this relationship costs me time. This relationship costs me money. This relationship costs me blood, sweat, tears, everything. And yet what we say is, it is worth it. I'm willing to sacrifice all of these things because I'm willing to lift up the value of this relationship. And so, in considering all of that, it might be the case that you're thinking, well, I don't really see a problem in my relationships. And so consider the statistic. A Barna Group study found that teens and adults alike spend nearly 8 hours a day on screens. Now, in other words, we could say teens and adults alike spend 8 hours a day engaged in the technological world. But this is Mason. So let's assume that we're better than average, right? And so if we're better than average, then let's say that we spend 6 hours a day in screens in the technological world. Now, if that's the case, then we're still spending 42 hours a week staring at a screen or engaged in the technological world. We're still spending 91 full days a year staring at screens. And so the question I would ask, and the question I've had to ask myself, and the answer I don't like, is do I even spend half as much time investing like that in the relationships that matter the most to me? Do I spend even half as much time a week with my children? Do I spend even half as much time a week with my wife, with my friends, with people that I really care about? Do I? That's a tough pill to swallow. And so at this point, my goal is not to send you away in shame and to think, oh, well, my relationships suck. Rather, my goal is to send you away with hope and with encouragement. And so what I'd simply like to encourage you is that in order to move from I suppose, taking technological values into our relational world, it just requires, at first, a change of mind. It requires us to think differently about our relationships. Instead of looking at our relationships and expecting efficient, immediate results, we can think, I would rather have a relationship in which there is endurance and commitment. Instead of looking at our relationships and saying, I want it to be comfortable and safe, we say, I'm willing to take risks. I'm willing to hurt. Instead of looking at our relationships selfishly and saying, I want that which is cheap, we are willing to say, I will sacrifice whatever is necessary so that my relationships may prosper and flourish. Thank you.